What's going on, everybody? It's your host, Jake Wood, on the Viva Alberto's podcast. Today, we're going to answer some questions like, where do we see the team at right now? How do you mix the old with the new? And lastly, what's still missing from this Cardinals team going forward? We'll answer those questions and more with our guest today, Rob Cerfolio.
Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy.
Breeze hits it in the air to center. We will see you tomorrow night.
This is the Viva Alberto's podcast on SB Nation. Welcome into another episode of the Viva Alberto's podcast. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. We have with us today Cardinals Assistant General Manager and Head of Player Development and Performance, Rob Cerfolio.
Fresh. Go DJ, that's my DJ.
Rob, how you doing today, man? Thanks for coming on, and this has been a long time coming.
I'm doing great. I appreciate you guys having me on and look forward to chatting a little Cardinals baseball with you guys. So thanks again.
It's always a great day to be able to talk some Cardinals baseball. And let's start out with this. Let's start with the big league club before we jump into the nitty gritty.
Sure.
June hasn't been, the greatest months for the team overall, but the boys managed to just sweep the White Sox, and they're coming home for a very important 7-game homestand against the division rivals, Chicago Cubs and Cincinnati Reds. What has been your impressions of this team so far this season, and more specifically from your seat, what types of things are you looking for going forward from this group?
I think it's been a really fun team to be working with. That's the number one thing. When I say fun team, like obviously winning is fun, but I think just playing winning baseball, and when I say winning baseball, that doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna win the runs battle every night. But the way in which you go about the game, like excelling in all three phases of offense, defense, base running, kind of doing the little things correct on defense, taking the extra 90, limiting extra 90s, challenging hitters, playing aggressive. Like those are the things that, I think Ollie and his group do a tremendous job preaching and modeling each and every day. And I think our players have really took to that. And that's allowed us to, even when we've lost or go on stretches, where we've lost 5 or 6 in a row, I think they've been competitive games. And that speaks to just kind of the identity that I think everybody sees when they watch our guys play. And, we got a lot of guys that are hungry, to the Victor Scott Youngry slogan that's starting to catch some steam. I think our guys have really took to that, and just the resilient approach, whether they're in the batter's box or on the bump, just, not backing down, competitive. And that's allowed us to stay in a lot of ball games. And I think why we've won a lot of those, and even if we haven't won that night, the loss has kind of been of a winning baseball approach. So, that's been one of the biggest things that stood out to me. And I just think that's the identity we want to build as an organization. So it's been really fun to just have some proximity to those guys. And, I think, like I said, a huge credit goes to Ollie and his group on that.
Is that type of mindset something that you have to preach starting at the minor league level, or is that something that kind of comes about organically and has a trickle down, or is that part of Marmol's effect on the clubhouse as well?
That's a great question. I definitely think your leaders need to model and embody that vision. But I also think it's something that you can and need to teach. And, even going back to my days in Cleveland, I think that was just something that we really tried to pride ourselves on organizationally. We knew, just like everybody else in baseball knew, that we weren't going to lead the league in home runs, and we weren't going to sign the most free agents and spend the most dollars in free agency. So we had to win on the margins. And I think like a group of guys that own a collective identity like that, and then you teach and preach that, the second guys join the organization, and then your best players model it, like we have the luxury of having up at the major leagues with several of our best players, and just how they go about their business. It becomes really easy for new players to just, that's all they know. That's the culture that they grow up in. And then you hire great coaches and people around that believe in that same thing, and live it every day. And I think, coming over here as a new guy, that's been one of the coolest things. A lot of people talk about the Cardinal way, and everyone has maybe a little bit different answer of what that is, but ultimately I think it is just playing winning baseball and valuing the right things. And then our job, whether it's in the big leagues or in the minor leagues, is to help teach and instill that into each and every coach, staff member, or player that we have. And then when that shows up on field and good things happen as a result, your whole group just kind of starts owning that identity, which is pretty cool.
Rob, so I know like before you joined the team, I believe it was this year, or but
Yep.
last year we kind of saw a little bit of a change in the MO with Cardinals pitching. I know you've had a really big impact on the team this year in that department, especially. We saw them last year, kind of focus less on, I would say, the command control profile, opting to throw less fastballs with a lot of their guys, focusing more on their secondaries. And we're
Hmm.
seeing a lot more of the strikeout guys really coming into fruition. We're seeing a blossoming Eshawn Henderson in Double A in Springfield. We're seeing a blossoming
Yep.
Bryson Motts. I could go on with a few other guys, Jacob Odell down at the complex, now at Palm Beach.
Yep.
Several guys just, making that extra step. Obviously that's a plan that you guys implemented last year and are fully executing this year. Can you kind of just elaborate on how that process happens from a executive standpoint, where you kind of, that brainchild happens in someone's mind, you guys disseminate it amongst the executive staff, the front office staff, and how does that message kind of get down and how is it relayed to the coaches and eventually the players? What is the process that goes behind that?
Yeah, great question. There, there's a lot there. I'll do my best to try and be specific enough, but
Mhm.
also broad enough. And Adam, if you have a follow-up, feel free to jump in and interrupt me. But yeah, I think coming over here, going all the way back to my first couple of weeks in October, and even before that, right? It was, me as a new guy trying to come in here and just learn what are the things that we feel like as an organization we're doing really well, and where are there opportunities to improve, and how can I use my own experience in Cleveland and a bunch of really smart people that I had the pleasure of working with over there, and ultimately trying to hire some smart people from different organizations that had also had success across the industry. And it really just started with getting all those people in a room and asking a similar question like this: is who do we want to be about, and what are the things that we're going to stand for and really build towards, and ask ourselves, like, if we had to work backwards from what do the best major league pitching staffs do at a high level, let's dig into the answer of that question, and then let's be really strategic about every piece of the acquisition side of it, to how we're developing players and building player plans, to how we're tweaking strategy with guys already in the big leagues, to guys all the way down in rookie ball, where we're kind of starting at the basics of throwing strikes and throwing hard and learning pitch shapes that we project to have success in the future. So it depends on where the player is at all points in that learning process, but you need to have an identity or a set of things that you are solving for as an organization, so that, one, you can kind of measure your own success, but two, ideally those things kind of are tried and truth attributes that produce winning baseball at the major league level. So it's really using all that information, getting a group together in a room over a course of several days, and really defining with great detail what are those attributes that we're going to develop towards. And then you build player plans and you coach towards those things at scale. And you need to have a bunch of really great people on the coaching and on the executive side to pull that off. And then you need to make that messaging really clear to our players. And I think that's some of the first things that we've tried to do out of the chute is, what are those values? We're not hiding any of those things behind a Wizard of Oz curtain. We're being really honest and transparent with our players about those things, and they have a huge voice in what they're working on and why. We call that partnering with the player. They are ultimately the most important piece of that puzzle, to have motivation and autonomy towards what we're working on. And so we want those values to be clear. We want them to be as objective as we can make them, so we can measure success. And then we want to have a lot of fun doing that every day and making it competitive and gamifying it, and showing our guys in the minor leagues, especially, how it correlates to major leagues results. And in the major leagues, like those more quicker short-term wins of, hey, let's think about maybe doing this from a pitch usage standpoint and why we project that could help you attacking lefties or righties more effectively. And then when you have those wins in game, you have a great chance to just, praise the player and talk about that. And hopefully it just becomes like an identity of how we go about things top to bottom. So hopefully that was specific enough with also not getting too long winded.
No, no, that was great. I was a little worried that my question was a little too just not specific and to the point enough. So you did a really good job answering that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, so Rob, I wanted to ask you. I'm not going to ask about anything proprietary or a trade secret, but I was wondering if you could help people that may not understand too much about what it is that you do and how you interact with the other people in the executive staff. Can you identify something, for example, that you are doing and implementing now within your sphere that the organization was not?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the big just process items with what we were just talking about, right? Of what are we working like in order to have player plans done at a high level for 200 players, major leaguers or minor leaguers, like you need to know what you're solving for one player, right? So you have to at a really high level organizationally get a bunch of people in a room and say, this is the thing that we're going to work towards. And this is how the performance department and the baseball department are going to work together so that anytime we're doing something with an athlete, it's pushing them towards the singular, most important objective that we have for that player. So I think of like all the most fun things that we did in the offseason. Obviously, we brought in a lot of new people, and our major league staff was incredibly invested and active in this process, which was super important to me just to create that cohesion across all of our groups. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for how much effort and time they put into all of these things in the off season, which was really cool. And so really it was just digging into what do we want our initiatives at the singular player plan level looking like? And then how do we scale that so that every player in the Dominican to every player in the major leagues, AAA, wherever, like has a set of goals that they're working on. They know what they are. They're simple, yet targeted towards things that we project to be really impactful for them. So, from afar, that might sound really easy or really basic, but when you have to actually coordinate that in action across 400 plus people, including staff and players, it's actually really freaking hard to do. So I think of all the fun things that we started digging into early on, going all the way back to November, December, as some of our hiring started to solidify, was really trying to spend a bunch of time on that and all the various process that goes into that. It's not just about creating a plan. It's then about 2 months later, making sure that that plan is right and that the player is progressing towards the things that we think long-term are going to be most impactful for him. And sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board and start over, and that's okay. And so really just trying to build a culture and understanding towards how we want to accomplish that for all of our players. But then to be able to actually do that during the season when there's a lot of things going on, and also be ready to go back to the drawing board when we need it, and be humble enough as a group to say, like, you know what, we got that wrong 2 months ago. We have new information. We need to change gears towards this. And sometimes you get that right 2 months earlier, and it's really a maintain of what you're working on. But it's just trying to get all people coordinated off of the same sheet of music, for lack of a better analogy, is actually quite difficult to do. And it's probably been the most fun thing that I think I've been able to work on with our new group over here in conjunction with the group that's been here for a long time.
Rob, on previous shows that you participated in, you kind of described the player development process kind of like a school, right? And you guys in the front office are the principals, essentially. What grade level of this school, so like in this analogy, the school being the minor leagues, what grade level, if you will, are you most excited about right now from a development standpoint? So like what grade level are you most excited about as you're watching their kind of growth process?
Yeah, well, first off, I hope I'm not the principal. I think our guys are going to be in a hell of a lot of trouble if that's the case. But it is fun that little school analogy has taken grasp. And there's there's a lot of bright spots at all the levels. And, candidly, I see the major leagues as one of those levels as well, right? Like in the big leagues, you're always developing and you need to continue to develop. Otherwise, other good major leaguers or other young prospects that weren't major leaguers a year ago that now are trying to take your job or pass you by. So, I want to actually like that, and just that common understanding and common vision for, again, like a ton of credit goes to Ollie. Like that's how he thinks about development at the major leagues, and I think he's actually talked about that quite a bit publicly this year of how he's continuing to push our players up there. So that's really exciting to me. Just a group from all the way top to bottom that owns that identity, and then obviously I think our AA, AAA levels have some really exciting players, and so do our lower levels. Obviously maybe I'm a little biased by the fact that Springfield was able to win the first half of the Texas League last night, but I think those guys deserve a shout out. And we had a bunch of talented players opening on that roster to start the season. Some of them are still there, and some of them have moved on to AAA. And I think just Patrick Anderson, our AA manager, and Ben Johnson, our AAA manager, like all of our guys deserve a lot of credit for especially trying to push this up and coming prospect wave that we have in the upper levels, and that goes for the same with our lower level group as well.
And
While you're talking about working with like those 400 different people across all those levels from the Dominican over to St. Louis,
Yeah.
what's kind of that time balance or priority you spend on those levels, especially with going into next year with a potential change in role or responsibility? Do you have your hand dipping in more in one pool more than the other?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So obviously I'm based out of St. Louis, so I'm here for every major league game, and most of my travel is really to AAA and AA, and I think that's just going all the way back to Heim's initial vision for what did he want to set up. Was a lot of the themes that we had talked about, and that's kind of why we also have a farm director in Larry Day, who's really leading the day-to-day minor league operations with heavy emphasis on the AA and down guys, and he's obviously playing a huge part in what we're doing in AAA as well. But I'm biasing a little bit more of my time towards the 40-man players and some of the guys at the upper levels, and obviously here in St. Louis, kind of supporting the group as well. So that's kind of how we've gone about it so far this year, and I think it's been a productive division of labor, and obviously I'm super blessed to have had LD come over here with me from Cleveland, and that's a man that is both a friend and a trusted coworker, and he's doing a really great job in his first year as farm director, kind of really leading the day to day and focusing a lot of his time from the AA guys all the way down to the lowest levels of rookie ball.
And Rob, so something I kind of wanted to ask, kind of switching gears. So, as someone, myself who I never played baseball past, like I never really obviously got to the college level and played an Ivy League like you did. For me it was more so like out of like love of the game. I was in sports analytics club and at WashU, had
Love
some
it.
nice projects with my friends. But, I haven't really put in like at some point I definitely want to work in baseball, and I am 25 years old. But, I kind of wanted to know, like, is there obviously time is always ticking, but is there like a certain like time where like okay where teams will say, okay, hey, maybe we this guy's getting up there in age, maybe his mind is not as moldable. Is there kind of like a philosophy there when teams are hiring like junior analysts? And also the second part, in order to kind of prepare myself, I don't really have much of a background in coding or programming. So in order to kind of build that resume, what are some of the best, courses of action do you think and someone in my opinion, in my position should take in order to best make myself a candidate?
Yeah, good question. To try and tackle your first part, I don't think there's really an age cliff or anything along those lines. I think, generally when teams do most of their hiring, and obviously this is just, my own opinion on it, right? Like there's probably people with other opinions across the industry, and each team kind of goes about their hiring in their own unique way. But generally, I think teams tend to hire in the fall, and I think as kind of like the analyst or office groups have gotten a little bit bigger, at least in the decade that I've been, working on this side of the game. The big thing that I always tell people is to have like hard skills and experience that people can point to, that make you an interesting hire. And going back 10 years ago, I think maybe there was more entrance level opportunities where people were just taking flyers on either former players or people that they knew and hoping that they would come in and learn on the job. And I still think, there's a lot of learning on the job that occurs. But now, so more than ever, I do feel like, just kind of the bar for having a set of hard skills, whether it's coding, whether it's scouting, whether it's whatever department, you might be most interested in as a candidate. Just think about what are the things you'd be asked to do on that job, and then to spend time like getting your hands dirty and developing skills that that group can both see and kind of interview you towards, to make sure that you can come in and help our group win a game tomorrow and win a game 5 years from now. So that's kind of the, I don't know if, if I'm even qualified to necessarily dish out advice, but that would be maybe the 1 or 2 cent of information that I'd relay, or what I have relayed to a bunch of other people that have asked me that same question.
Yeah, and I guess more so for like the analyst kind of
Sure.
role. Like, so I guess you also kind of mentioned that, I guess about a 10 like 5, 10 years ago there was more more positions open that are more like entry level. So if
Hmm.
it's more so now that there's a little bit of a barrier to entry, what, like, I guess like from like a programming perspective, or like experience perspective, what are those tangible things? Like, as like, are there certain languages that I need to know, or just anyone that needs to know? Or is there something? This probably should have been a question for after the interview, but, and I guess I'm
No, no worries, no
like,
worries. Yeah, so it kind of depends on the team. Like every team will use different coding languages. I think SQL's a pretty good bet. A lot of teams use R. But then when you get into like Python and some of those other tools, like, it kind of becomes more team based. But in all honesty, like, yeah, I think as an analyst, it's the more that you can really get your hands dirty with those types of projects and have a proof of product. Like there's the same number of jobs as there was. Actually, there's more jobs available now than there were 10 years ago. But the barrier for like hard skills in order to get those jobs is more and more competitive. So I think that's where, you developing time, like if you want to do baseball analysis, like start doing some of that work in your free time, and find a forum to post that, so when you do get into an interview you have proof of product that you can show people versus just talk towards.
Mhm. No, absolutely. I know a couple people that I know I'm decently close with that do that right now, so it's definitely worth reaching out to them. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, you bet.
Hey, Rob, I wanted to ask you about, the pitcher's arms a little bit. Is there a, um, I know people who have, young boys and, traveling baseball and things like that. From your standpoint, is there a, an age where it's safe for a pitcher's arm to throw things like sliders and curveballs? Do you have a take on that? I know one guy in particular, he won't let his pitchers throw anything other than a changeup in addition to
Mm.
the fastball at a certain age.
Yeah, I'll be the first to tell you when I don't have expertise in a space, and this is probably a space that I don't have expertise. But like I said earlier, when we were kind of getting ready to start, I do have a 2.5-year-old son, and this is certainly a space that I hope to do a little bit more research over time. I think anecdotally, my big thing on the whole youth sports is try and make it fun. And there's probably some elements of travel ball and the cost that has on families that's overrated, and especially at the younger ages. Like, I just think of how these skills show up in professional baseball, of like teaching speed and strength and general athleticism and movement quality. Like people that or players that have those attributes tend to be really good players at the highest levels of professional baseball. So, at least I know with my son, those are going to be things that we hope to be focused on if he enjoys playing baseball, and that would maybe be my half a cent worth of opinion in that space. But like I said, that's certainly not an area where I have a lot of expertise, but hope to gain it, as my kids get a little bit older.
Sure. My last thing was, sometimes talking about the players that you work with can be like talking, about your children. You can't pick
Yeah.
just one, but I wonder if you could possibly identify somebody for us that, may not have been on all the big radar screens, or whatever it is, maybe prospect lists or,
Yeah.
all the highlights, but that has actually really taken to something that you've worked with that player on and made some nice progress that we might not know about.
Yeah, there's a lot of names here, and some of these go back to even spring training when was kind of asked a similar question, and names like Eshawn Henderson or Bryson Motts or Raynel Rodriguez at the time. I don't think was like a super hyped up um, prospect just yet. He was definitely gaining attention, but all of those guys, I think just by way of their work quality and their coachability are having a lot of success this year. And then you look at names like Leo Bernal, guys that were a little bit of a prospect name that has really taken on some impressive development in season. A guy like Josh Baez, names like that. And then, I think on the pitching side too, like, we had some of the names like the Quinn Matthews, the Tink Hences of the world that were certainly big name prospects coming into the year. And they dealt with minor injuries, but really the big thing during getting them, you're not trying to rush them back, right? You're trying to take your time, trying to get them in an awesome position to succeed and help them be the best version of themselves, because we're thinking more about their long-term development than we are their short-term development of just how many innings did they throw in May of 2025. So those guys I think really stand out to me as well of just kind of going through a little bit of adversity and being really hungry to lean into that and get better. And then you look at guys like TK Roby, he's added a couple pitches this year. Just an incredibly mature, driven athlete that's been a real pleasure to work with. And then, some of the fun stories behind that, like the Granillos or the Gastelums, I think a really interesting arm in Springfield that again has taken on some extra pitches. And I think a huge shout out and credit goes to our scouting group in general for just valuing character and the potential for coachability. And, it's myself and the guys that have been here kind of walked into a group of guys on the player side that's really hungry to learn and get better. So there's probably another 20 names that I could list off. But it's cool to hear, out of the chute, you guys mentioned some of those guys that weren't even really in prospect top 30 lists, but are really talented players that have really took to some of the new things and some of the old things, and all those things kind of together working in unison. And they've had a really impressive start of the year so far, which has been great.
All right, Rob, we got one more question for you, and we'll get you out of here on this. As
Cool.
I'm sure that the big focus away from the current rostered players right now is the upcoming draft internally. And, Randy Flores has historically done a great job, and you work very close with him on a day-to-day basis. From an overall organizational perspective, what's an element, whether it's in the minor leagues or in the majors, that you think is missing that you'd like to see be added over the course of the next several weeks or months? Is it a more high-end pitching, or is it a big middle-of-the-order bat? What's an element you think is missing from the future of this team that can kind of get them back to that perennial contender status?
Yeah, it's a good question. First off, just speaking to the job Flo's done on, obviously long before I got here, and what a great teammate and coworker he is. That's been a real pleasure for me to, kind of work closely with him, especially in some of like the draft support side of things has been awesome. And, I think from a broad strokes, we have a lot of talented players in various different positional groups, whether you're just splicing that by pitching position players or you're really digging into infielders, outfielders, catchers. I've always been a subscriber to like who do our scouting group thinks the best available that has the best makeup, and let's go get a bunch of those guys. And if we look up in a couple of years, we'll have a lot of really good pieces in our organization. So, generally, I'm really looking forward to see how Flo kind of leads and runs the draft room and play a small helping hand and kind of how we're going about it on the side whenever he needs me. But in general, I think we have a lot of talented players, and just by adding more of them, regardless of what position they play, that gives us options in the future.
Sure, absolutely. Rob, thank you so much for your time, for taking some time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us. We really appreciate it, and I think I speak for all of Cardinal fans. Once again, just welcome to the Cardinals family, and thank you so much for doing this and being a part of this Cardinal Nation, and thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, no, like I said from the jump, I appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate, everyone out there that's really welcomed me and my family with open arms. I couldn't have asked for a much better transition, even though transition is really hard, both on the professional and personal side. But it's gone about as good as it can go. And obviously, really grateful for just the teammates I have here on our side of things, and all the work we're doing with the guys in the big leagues to help them get better, to all the guys down in the minor leagues. So it's been a really fun collaborative effort over here, and I appreciate everything you guys do to kind of bring a lot of this to life, and obviously cover the team and the organization at the extent that you guys do is awesome. So thank you guys again for having me.
And hopefully we can catch up with you again after the season, whenever things are a little less hectic, and kind of maybe digest the season that was the 2025 St. Louis Cardinals.
Sounds like a plan if you guys have me back.
We'd love to. For Rob Cerfolio, for Adam Akbani, for Mike Jones, and for our newest member, you heard his voice. We didn't really do an introduction. You'll get to know him more next week. But for Scott Plaza, I am your host, Jake Wood. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Viva Albertos podcast. Please leave a rate and review on your favorite platform and turn on those bell notifications so you can be notified the moment our newest episode is released. As always, make sure to give us a follow on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Facebook. Just type in Viva Albertos on any platform to find us. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.